What if the biggest threat to your organization isn't disruption itself, but your desperate attempt to avoid it? Because right now, the organizations struggling the most aren't the ones facing chaos. They're the ones pretending everything is okay. And that's uncomfortable to hear, especially for leaders who have spent their careers being rewarded for control, consistency, and predictability. But here's the truth I want to sit with you today. Disruption is no longer an event. It's the environment. And leadership, real leadership, isn't about restoring calm. It's about building capacity. Welcome to Purpose, Presence, People. I'm Antrea Dowd, and today we're going to talk about something most leaders feel, but few are trained to lead through. I'm not talking about change, not crisis, but sustained uncertainty. And I want to be clear about something up front. This by no means is a motivational talk. I want to call this a leadership masterclass. If you stay with me for the next 30 minutes, you will leave with language, frameworks, and leadership skills you can use immediately, not someday when things settle down, but today, right now. I'm Antrea Dowd, leadership strategist, speaker, and former director of patient experience with a foundation in leadership and organizational development. I've spent my career helping leaders show up with presence, communicate with intention, and drive results through people, not pressure. This podcast is about leadership that's practical, human, and impactful. Let's begin. I'm going to tell you why I came up with this. I remember sitting in a conference room where all the dashboards were green, volumes were high, turnover looked acceptable, employee engagement scores hadn't dropped to trigger any alarms. On paper, the system was working, but I knew better. You see, I was in a leadership role where the expectations were clear. Don't disrupt what's technically functioning. By playing it safe, it looked responsible. Questioning the model felt a little risky. The problem? The team was exhausted. Leaders were firefighting instead of leading, and we were measuring success by how quiet things stayed, not by how healthy the culture actually was. I remember hesitating before speaking up because once you name what isn't sustainable, you then inherit the responsibility for changing it. So I almost didn't. I told myself, this isn't the moment. Now isn't the time. Let's just get through this quarter. However, standing in my comfort zone was actually protecting the system instead of the people in the system. It was quietly costing us trust, engagement, and long-term stability. And that's when I realized leadership isn't about standing in the center of certainty. It's about standing at the edge long enough to see what others refuse to see. And then having the courage to say it out loud before the cost becomes irreversible. Because playing it safe didn't protect the system. It protected the problem. You see, when leaders talk about disruption, they usually talk about it like it's a storm, right? Something that arrives, causes a little bit of damage, and then eventually passes. But that mental model, well, it's outdated and frankly, dangerous. Because today's disruption, it doesn't arrive alone. It stacks on top of what's already there. It compounds. And here's the trick. It rarely resolves before the next wave of chaos comes. Like technology changes, workforce shifts, good old employee burnout. Even AI is coming in and giving us a little chaos. Trust erosion and public health volatility. You see, this isn't episodic disruption. This is permanent exposure, and yet many organizations are still leading as if the old rules apply. The lie we continue to tell ourselves is this. This situation is temporary. But here's the truth. The environment is not. So the question is no longer, how do we survive disruption? It's, who are we becoming because of it? So let's take a walk down memory lane. Do you remember a place called Blockbuster? Yeah, let's talk about Blockbuster for a moment. Not because it's clever, but because I believe it to be instructive. Follow me. Blockbuster didn't fail because they were stupid. They failed because they were optimized for a reality that no longer existed. You see, they were efficient. At the time, they were profitable and stable. However, that same stability became their liability. Why? Leadership didn't adjust. And so this is what I teach leaders to understand. Disruption is rarely a technical problem first. It's usually a leadership capacity problem. And so I want to give you a tool right now, something you can use the moment this episode ends. When disruption shows up in your organization, I want you to diagnose it across 3 domains. First, structure. Take a look at your facility, your policies, your workflows, how decisions are made, right? Second, I want you to look at the culture. What people believe is safe, what do they believe to be risky? What is rewarded or punished? That's your culture. Third, leadership. How quickly are decisions made? How does learning happen? And how much clarity do people actually have? You see, most leaders want to focus on structure, right? There's a problem and they're like, okay, they tweak the org chart. All of a sudden, positions exist that didn't exist before. Now everybody's getting these new titles, right? They update a couple of policies. But the real friction almost always lives in culture and leadership behavior. So if disruption feels exhausting right now, I want you to ask yourselves, where are we trying to preserve stability instead of building adaptability? Think about that. So let's talk about resilience, right? Anytime you bring up the word change, resilience pops up, right? So it's a leadership trigger word, right? Everybody likes to throw around, we're going to be resilient leaders. And I want to bring it up because I think we've misunderstood it. Resilience has been framed as endurance, as toughness, as we push through the adversity. But endurance is not resilience. Frankly, endurance is depletion with a good PR team. True resilience is not about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward differently. And here's where many organizations fall into what I like to call the resilience trap. You see, they celebrate the people who hold everything together, right? We're short-staffed. They take on extra shifts. They're managing extra departments, right? They're holding the team together. They reward the ones who absorb all of the pressure. Well, what they're actually doing is they're normalizing exhaustion. And then they wonder why no one's being innovative. No one's thinking outside of the box. The organization is stuck because what they have actually built is a system that survives stress, but doesn't learn from it. You see, modern resilience requires adaptive capacity. Adaptive capacity is built on 3 skills. First, clarity under pressure. Not certainty, but you need to have clarity. Second, decision making without complete data. When you rush to a solution, right? However, if you're waiting for full certainty, you're already behind. Third, learning in public. Leaders who only learn privately actually teach their organizations to hide. Leaders who learn out loud, you give permission for growth. Let me tell you what that sounds like. Here's a language I like to teach leaders to practice. We don't have all the answers yet, but we do have direction. This is a learning decision, not a forever decision. And we will adjust based on what we learn. It's like, look, I don't really know what to do here, but let's do this together, right? That language builds trust without pretending certainty exists. And so stability is no longer a leadership goal. Adaptability is. And, if this is not your first episode that you've heard from me, you've probably realized by now that I like psychological safety. I pretty much mention it in every episode. And I do it because it's one of the most misunderstood concepts in leadership. Let me tell you why. Psychological safety doesn't mean comfort. What? Yeah, it doesn't mean comfort. It doesn't mean avoiding hard conversations. Psychological safety means this. People believe that they can speak up without being punished, not without being challenged. So I'm going to share a case study with you. And as I give you this case study, later on, I'm going to ask you some questions to reflect back on this. Okay, so pay attention. There was a unit where staff kept raising the same concern in different ways, not loudly, not dramatically, quietly. They talked about call lights going unanswered during shift change, about new staff being floated without enough support, and about near misses that didn't quite meet the threshold to be reportable, but kept happening. Leadership saw the metrics, but they didn't see the pattern. On paper, staffing ratios were within range. Incidents were logged, but nothing catastrophic had occurred. So the response from leadership was always the same. Monitor it, educate, revisit next month. For the staff, speaking up started to feel dangerous. Every time they raised concerns, they were told they were being negative, that they needed to be more resilient, that everyone is stretched right now. So they stopped escalating. They stopped documenting the small stuff. They stopped volunteering ideas. They stopped believing it was safe to say, this isn't working. And then one night, what had been a near miss became a real harm. Nothing about it was surprising to the people on the floor. They had seen it coming for weeks. The investigation focused on what happened. But the real failure wasn't clinical. It was cultural. You see, in this story, the system didn't break because staff failed to speak up. It broke because leadership trained them not to. And so that's when you have to think about this and understand that the cost of change, while it feels uncomfortable, the cost of silence can be devastating. And the most dangerous signal in any organization, it isn't conflict. You know what it is? It's quiet compliance. So the edge of leadership isn't owned by the C-suite. It's owned by whoever is closest to reality. You see, people will speak up when three conditions are present. First, risk acknowledged. Second, the response is predictable. Third, learning is actually rewarded. If your people don't know what will happen when they speak up, they simply won't. One of the most damaging phrases that leaders use is this: why didn't you say something sooner? Right? I know I've said it myself, but let me tell you what that question does. It doesn't invite honesty. It actually helps punish honesty. And so a better question can be, help me understand what made it hard to raise this earlier. You see, culture is not what you say you value. Culture is what your people learn is safe through repeated experiences. And so let's pause for a moment. If this feels uncomfortable, you know me, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, but it's actually a good thing because learning disrupts identity before it builds competence. So I want you to stay with me, okay? Agility is not a personality trait. It's not. It's actually a practice, right? And so before any major decision, I teach this to leaders. Ask 3 questions. You know, I love a good self-reflection on yourself, reflection on what could be, scenario-based, right? And so when we do our first 3 questions, we say, what must remain stable? Second question, what is safe to experiment with? Third, how will we know if it has worked? You see, agility without structure creates chaos. However, on the flip side, structure without agility creates suffocation. And so scenario planning is not about predicting outcomes. It's about preparing leadership responses. So think about the case study that I gave you earlier about the team who was bringing up concerns. How would you lead if this happened at your organization? How would we communicate? How would we decide? You see, agility isn't speed. It's the ability to change direction without losing trust. Ladies and gentlemen, the leadership role has changed. You are no longer the source of all answers. However, you are the sense maker. People don't need you to predict the future. They need you to help the present make sense. Here's a leadership reality check. If every decision you make requires certainty, well, you've already lost. You must model learning in public. It's called vulnerability. It kind of sounds like this. Here's what we know so far. Here's what we're still learning. Here's what won't change. I think I probably said that during COVID to my team. Clarity is not certainty. I definitely didn't have certainty in what was going on. But clarity is orientation. I wanted my team to understand we're going to do this together. Because in that moment, they did not need me to predict the future. They needed me to help them understand what's going on right now in the present. And so when this chapter of uncertainty is written, will your organization be remembered as a dinosaur or a phoenix? You see, the edge is not chaos. The edge is where leadership finally becomes honest. And the organizations that will thrive next will not be the ones who avoided disruption, but the ones that learned how to lead inside the disruption. Standing at the edge of leadership long enough to see what others refuse to see. That's where renewal and growth begins. Most organizations won't fail because of the actual disruption. They fail because their leaders keep trying to protect a version of the organization that no longer exists. They'll confuse control with leadership. They'll confuse stability with strength. Most dangerously, they'll confuse silence with alignment. And by the time the numbers finally show the truth, the people have already left. You see, leadership was never meant to be comfortable. It was meant to be conscious, to notice what others avoid, to stand where certainty ends, to stay present long enough to make sense of what's actually happening, not what's convenient to believe. The edge of leadership is not chaos. The edge is where leadership stops performing and starts telling the truth. So here's the real question I'll leave you with tonight. When your people look back at this moment, this season of uncertainty, pressure, and change, will they say you protected their comfort, or that you prepared them for the future? Because leadership isn't proven when things are clear. It's proven when the path disappears and you choose to lead anyway. So here's what I want you to do tomorrow. Reflect. Ask yourself one honest question. Where am I choosing stability over truth? Then begin the conversation. Ask your team something most leaders avoid. What do you see coming that we're not thinking about yet? Your best asset are your frontline workers because they're in the trenches and they know what's going on. And I want you to listen to them, not to defend, not to fix, but to understand. Lead differently. And finally, choose one leadership behavior you are willing to let go of. One habit that made sense before, but no longer serves who you're becoming. Because the future isn't waiting for perfect leaders. It's waiting for brave ones. Lead from the edge. This is Purpose, Presence, People. Thank you for listening. Leadership lives in the moments that matter most. How you listen, respond, and lead under pressure. Take one idea from today and put it into practice. Thank you for listening. And remember, lead with intention, and I'll see you next time.